Hey guys, tonight we begin with something surprisingly simple. Sleep, so go ahead. Dim the lights a little. Maybe pull a blanket over yourself. Let your shoulders drop, because we are about to drift. Not into dreams, but into the slightly
uncomfortable, slightly strange, and very upright world of medieval sleep. Now, if you've ever struggled to get comfortable in bed, maybe flipped your pillow 10 times, or spent an hour trying to find that perfect position, well, medieval, people would like a word because for a very long time, across large parts of Europe, people believed that lying flat to sleep was not ideal, not cozy, not even particularly safe. Instead, many of them slept sitting up. Yes, actually sitting, propped up by pillow, wedged wooden frames, or whatever vaguely supportive structure they had lying around. And before you imagine some kind of calm, monk-like posture.
Let's be clear, this was not elegant, this was not ergonomic, this was slightly slouched, vaguely supported, and probably uncomfortable, but also completely normal. So tonight we're going to gently wander through this strange
habit. We'll meet the people who did it, the beliefs that supported it, and the quiet, slightly odd logic behind why lying down flat was sometimes seen as a bit suspicious. And along the way, we'll float through royal bedrooms, peasant cottages, drafty stone castles, and beds that were not quite what you think, so settle in, preferably lying down, like a modern rebel, and let's begin. Now, to understand why medieval people sometimes slept sitting up, we have to start with something very important, medieval medicine, which, to put it gently, had confidence, an impressive amount of confidence, accuracy, was a bit more hit or miss. At the center of medieval medical thinking was the idea of the 4 humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Yes, those. The basic idea was that your health depended on keeping these humours in balance. Too much of one, and things got weird. Too little, also weird. And everything, from your mood, to your digestion, to your general vibe, was supposedly influenced by this delicate internal cocktail. Now here's where sleep posture comes in. People believed that lying flat could cause these humours, especially phlegm, to pool in the wrong places, which sounds vague because it is. But in practical terms, they thought that if you lay completely flat, fluids in your body might not circulate properly, and when fluids don't circulate properly, medieval logic tells us bad things happen. Things like difficulty breathing, or what they might describe as heaviness of the chest, or simply a general sense that your body was not behaving politely. So, naturally, the solution was to prop yourself up, because if you're slightly upright, everything can flow just a bit better. It's almost like a medieval version of stacking pillows when you have a cold, except instead of mild discomfort, it was a deeply held medical belief, and honestly, in a very loose, accidental way, they weren't entirely wrong. Sleeping slightly elevated can help with breathing issues. It can reduce acid reflux. It can even help with certain heart conditions. So,
medieval people,
through a mix of observation and guesswork, landed on something that occasionally worked. Of course, they also applied this logic to basically everything, because why not double down? Now let's gently step into a medieval bedroom, or more accurately, a space that sort of functions as a bedroom, because privacy was not exactly a given. If you were wealthy, you might have a proper bed, maybe even one with curtains, a nice wooden frame, a mattress stuffed with straw or feathers, and layers
of blankets, very luxurious. By the standards of the time, if you were not wealthy, your sleeping arrangement might be a bit more flexible, a pile of straw, a shared bench, maybe a space on the floor near the fire, if you were lucky, And
in many cases, you weren't sleeping alone, not necessarily in a romantic sense, just in a practical, slightly crowded human sense. Families shared sleeping spaces. Servants slept nearby. Travelers sometimes piled into the same room. There are even records of complete strangers sharing beds at inns, which, today, might feel like a mild nightmare, but back then, it was just Tuesday. Now imagine trying to lie perfectly flat in a shared space. It's got a not great mattress, with limited room. Already, sitting up starts to make a bit more sense. T takes up less space. It keeps your position somewhat contained, and it allows you to stay slightly alert, because medieval nights were not always peaceful. Let's talk about that for a moment. Nighttime in the medieval world was dark, not dim, not softly lit, not cozy, dark once the sun went down and the candles burned low. Visibility dropped dramatically, and with that darkness came a certain level of unease. There were no streetlights, no emergency services, no quick way to check what that noise was, so people developed a kind of half-awareness during sleep, state where you are resting, but not completely gone, and sleeping upright helped with that. It made it easier to wake up quickly, to respond to sounds, to stay just a little bit ready. Because if something went wrong, a fire, a break-in, an animal wandering where it shouldn't, you didn't want to be fully sprawled out and disoriented. You wanted to be ready-ish, not exactly alert, but not entirely defenseless either. Now, let's gently drift over to the upper classes, because surely kings and queens, with all their wealth and resources, must have been lying down comfortably, right? Well, not always. Even among the elite, there was a strong belief that sleeping flat was not ideal. In fact, many wealthy individuals used beds designed specifically to keep them slightly upright. They had bolsters, angled headboards, and carefully arranged pillows to maintain that position, and of course, this was all done with a certain level of ceremonial flair, because if you're going to sit up while sleeping, you might as well do it elegantly. There are even accounts of nobles receiving visitors while in bed, propped up, looking composed, as if they had simply chosen to lounge there,
rather than being gently trapped by their own bedding arrangement. It's a look. It's slightly sleepy, slightly regal, very upright look. And once again, the reasoning circles back to health, good posture, better breathing, balanced humours, and
perhaps just a touch of tradition. Because once something becomes common among the elite, it tends to stick, even if it's mildly uncomfortable. Now, here's where things get a little more interesting, because sleeping upright wasn't just about health, it was also about symbolism. In medieval culture, lying flat was strongly associated with death. Think about it. When someone died, they were laid out, flat, still, and motionless. So there was a subtle, almost subconscious discomfort with adopting that same position while alive. It felt a bit too close, a bit too final. So by sleeping slightly upright, people
were, in a way,
distancing themselves from that imagery. They were alive, they were active, even in rest. They were not lying like a corpse. It's a small detail. But in a world filled with religious symbolism and constant reminders of mortality, it mattered. Now, let's pause here for a moment. Take a slow breath and imagine yourself in a medieval room. The air is cool. The light is dim. The sounds are soft, but unpredictable. You settle into your bed or your pile of straw or your shared sleeping space. You arrange your pillow or your rolled-up cloth behind your back. You lean slightly forward or slightly back. Not quite sitting, not quite lying somewhere in between, and you close your eyes, not fully relaxed, but not entirely tense either, just
existing in that quiet, upright stillness. You're still in that dim medieval room, still slightly upright, supported by pillows that have seen better days. And outside, the night is doing what medieval nights do best, which is being
quietly unsettling. Now here's where things take a gentle turn into something even more unusual. Because medieval people didn't just sleep differently in terms of posture. They also slept in segments. Yes, instead of one long, uninterrupted stretch of sleep, many people followed a pattern known as first sleep and second sleep, which sounds almost organized, almost intentional, and in many ways, it was. So here's how it worked. You'd go to bed not long after sunset because, well, there wasn't much else to do. No phones, no late night shows, no endless scrolling, just darkness, and maybe a candle if you were feeling fancy. You'd drift off into your first sleep, which would last a few hours, and then, quite naturally, you would wake up. Not abruptly, not in a panic, just gently awake as if your body had decided that was enough for now. And here's the important part. This waking period wasn't considered a problem. It wasn't insomnia, it wasn't something to fix. It was expected. People would simply sit there in the quiet, in the dim light, and exist for a while, which in today's world might sound like a minor
inconvenience. But in the medieval world, it was a built-in feature. Now imagine that moment. You're sitting up, because of course you are. Your back supported by cushions. Your body still warm from sleep. The room is quiet, except for the
occasional creak of wood or the soft sound of someone else breathing nearby. And you're awake. Not fully alert, not groggy either. Just in between. This was a time for very gentle activities. People might pray, reflect, maybe whisper a conversation to someone nearby. Some would get up, walk a little, check on things. There are even accounts of people visiting neighbors during this period, which is a bold choice, but apparently acceptable. Hello. Yes. Just thought I'd stop by. It's 2 a.m. Very casual. Others might tend to small tasks, stir the fire, adjust bedding, or simply sit and think, which, if we're being honest, is something many of us still do. Except now it usually involves staring at a ceiling and questioning life choices, so not entirely different. After this quiet interval, which could last anywhere from a few minutes to a couple of hours, people would return to sleep. This was the second sleep, and it would carry them through until morning. No alarms, no snooze. Buttons, just a natural rhythm. First sleep, wake, second sleep. Simple, predictable, and apparently quite normal. Now let's gently connect this back to the whole sleeping upright situation, because these two habits actually worked together. When you're expecting to wake up in the middle of the night, you don't necessarily want to be fully sprawled out, deeply settled, completely disconnected from your surroundings. You want a position that allows for easy transition from sleep to wakefulness and back again, and sitting up or being slightly elevated makes that easier. It's less of a dramatic shift, more of a gentle adjustment. You're already halfway there. So when you wake up, you're not disoriented, you're just awake, which, in a world without electric light or clear timekeeping, was actually quite practical. Now, there's another layer to this, because medieval people didn't just accept this pattern, they often believed it was healthier. There are writings from the time suggesting that this segmented sleep allowed the body to better process food,
regulate humours, and maintain overall balance. Again, the humours are doing a lot of work here, but the idea was that this break in the night gave the body time to reset, To not be overwhelmed by a single long stretch of inactivity. It's almost like they viewed sleep as something that needed pacing, which is kind of fascinating because modern science has started to explore similar ideas. There's some
evidence that under natural light conditions, without artificial interference, humans may actually drift toward a more segmented sleep pattern. So medieval people, once again, might have been onto something, not intentionally, perhaps, but functionally. Now let's drift over to a slightly different scene, a monastery. Because if anyone had a structured approach to sleep, it was monks. Monks lived by strict schedules, prayer times, work periods, moments of silence, and yes, very specific, sleep routines. Many monastic communities would wake during the night for prayers known as vigils, which meant that even if you wanted a full, uninterrupted sleep, you weren't getting one. Instead, you'd sleep for a while, wake up, attend prayers, and then return to sleep. So again, we see this pattern: sleep, wake, sleep. And in this setting, sleeping upright or semi-upright could be quite useful, because when it's time to wake up and pray, you don't want to be completely collapsed into your bedding. You want to rise calmly, smoothly, without too much resistance, and maybe without drawing too much attention to the fact that you were just deeply asleep 5 seconds ago. Now, let's add one more quiet detail: dreams. Medieval people placed a surprising amount of importance on dreams. They saw them as messages, signs, sometimes even warnings. And the period between first and second sleep, that quiet, wakeful time, was considered especially significant for reflecting on those dreams. You'd wake up, remember fragments, and think about them. What did it mean? Was it symbolic? Was it important? Or was it just your brain doing something mildly confusing? Hard to say, but the key point is there was space for that reflection. Time, in the middle of the night, where the world was quiet, and your thoughts could just drift. And again, being slightly upright, slightly aware, made that easier. You weren't lost in deep sleep. You were present. Now, as we slowly move forward, it's worth noting that not everyone followed this pattern exactly. Medieval life was not perfectly uniform. Some people slept longer, some shorter. Some were too exhausted to wake up in the middle of the night at all. And others may have simply ignored the whole sitting up idea and lay down like modern rule breakers. But overall, these patterns were common enough to shape how people thought about sleep. It wasn't something you did once, for 8 hours, and then moved on. It was a rhythm, a cycle, a gentle rise and fall through the night. So now, picture it again. You've finished your first sleep. You've woken quietly. You've spent a little time thinking, maybe adjusting your position,
maybe just listening to the stillness, and now
you settle back, still slightly upright, still supported, and you drift once more into that second sleep, softly, without urgency, without expectation, just letting the night carry you. You're still in that quiet room, still somewhere between sitting and lying, in a position that would probably confuse a modern mattress designer. And now we turn our attention to something very important: the bed itself. Because as it turns out, medieval beds were not always designed with your comfort in mind. Shocking. I know, let's start with the idea of what a bed actually was. Today, we imagine something soft, supportive, maybe memory foam, maybe something that promises to change your life in a suspiciously enthusiastic advertisement. Medieval beds were a bit more grounded if you were wealthy. You might have a proper wooden bed frame, something solid, often quite large, sometimes even carved with decorative details. just to remind everyone that yes, you are important. Even while sleeping, inside that frame, you'd have a mattress, and by mattress, we mean a sack, filled with something. Could be straw, could be feathers, if you were lucky, could be wool or scraps of fabric. And over time, that filling would shift, clump, flatten, and generally lose any sense of structure. So instead of a smooth, even surface, you might end up with hills and valleys, a sort of topographical map of discomfort. Now imagine lying completely flat on that. Not ideal. Your back, your neck, your general sense of alignment all slightly confused. But if you sit up or lean back against something, suddenly the unevenness matters a bit less. You're not relying on the entire surface to support you, just part of it. So once again, the upright position starts to make practical sense. Not just medical, not symbolic, just practical. Now let's gently slide down the social ladder a bit, because not everyone had a fancy bed frame. In fact, many people didn't have a bed at all, at least not in the way we think of it. Instead, they had sleeping arrangements, which is a polite way of saying a place where you try to rest without too many complaints. This could be a pile of straw on the floor, a wooden bench, a simple mat, or sometimes a combination of all three, depending on what was available. Now, if you've ever tried to sleep flat on a hard surface, you already know how that goes. You start off optimistic. This is fine. You think, I can do this. And then about 10 minutes later, your shoulder starts to protest, your hips feel strange, and your spine begins composing a formal letter of complaint. So what do? You adjust. You shift. You prop yourself up, even slightly, because sitting or leaning can actually be more comfortable than lying flat, when the surface beneath you is less than forgiving. And for many medieval people, that was simply the reality. Comfort was relative, and upright was sometimes the best option available. Now, let's talk about something quietly important: warmth, because medieval nights, especially in colder regions, could be quite cold. There was no central heating, no electric blankets, just fire, and fire has limits. It burns down, it flickers, it doesn't always reach every corner of a room, so people had to find ways to stay warm. Layers of clothing, heavy blankets sharing body heat, which again meant sleeping close to others, whether you planned to or not. And here's where posture comes in again. When you curl slightly or sit up, you reduce the surface area exposed to the cold. You keep your core warmer. You trap heat more effectively. Lying flat, especially on a cold surface, can draw warmth away from your body, but sitting or leaning can help conserve it. So, once again, the upright position is not just a random habit, it's a quiet adaptation, a way of dealing with the environment, a small, practical solution to a very real problem. Now, let's add one more layer: clothing. Because medieval people didn't necessarily change into soft, cozy sleepwear the way we do. Often, they slept in what they wore during the day, or something very similar, which might include layers, belts, maybe even outer garments, depending on the situation. Not exactly designed for lying flat and stretching out, more suited to your sitting or reclining. So again, posture follows practicality. You sleep the way your body and your clothing allow, and sometimes that means staying a little bit upright. Now let's gently move into a more interesting corner of medieval life: travel. Because if you think sleeping at home was a bit unpredictable, traveling was an entirely different experience. Inns existed, of course, but they were not always consistent. You might arrive at an inn after a long day, tired, ready to rest, and find that your sleeping arrangement is a shared bed, with 2 or 3 strangers in a room that smells faintly of everything, which is not ideal. In these situations, people often adapted. They might sit up, lean against a wall, or rest in a semi-upright position simply because it felt safer, more controlled, less vulnerable. Because when you're surrounded by unfamiliar people in a dimly lit space with your belongings nearby, you don't necessarily want to be completely unconscious and sprawled out. You want to maintain a little awareness, a little presence, and sitting up helps with that. It's not
perfect, but it's something. Now,
let's take a slow breath here and notice something. None of these reasons, on their own, fully explain why medieval people slept sitting up, but together they create a pattern. Medical beliefs, symbolic meanings, practical limitations, environmental conditions, all gently nudging people toward the same general idea. Stay a little upright, stay a little aware, stay somewhere between rest and readiness. And over time, this becomes normal, not questioned, not debated, just accepted. Because when everyone around you sleeps a certain way, it doesn't feel strange, it feels correct. Now, picture yourself.
Again, in that medieval space, the bed beneath you is uneven, but manageable. The air is cool, but your body is warm, wrapped in layers. You're not fully lying down, not fully sitting up, just balanced.
In that quiet in-between, your breathing slows, your thoughts drift, and you rest, not perfectly, not deeply, all at once, but enough, always, just enough. You're still there, gently balanced between sitting and lying in that quiet medieval night. And now, we're going to drift into something a little more human, because sleep, like almost everything in the medieval world, depended very heavily on who you were, your status, your wealth, your general level of importance, or lack of it. Because while everyone needed sleep, not everyone got the same version of it. Let's begin, softly, with kings, because if anyone had the resources to sleep however they wanted, surely it was them. And yes, kings and queens had beds that were objectively impressive. Large wooden frames, carved details, layers of fabric, heavy curtains that could be drawn closed, creating a kind of soft, enclosed space, almost like a room within a room, very cozy, in theory. But here's the thing, royal sleep was not always private. In fact, it was often quite public, because in many medieval courts, the king's bedchamber was not just a place to rest, it was a place of ceremony, a place where important moments happened, and sometimes a place where people just existed nearby. Servants, advisors, attendants, all moving in and out, even as the king prepared for sleep or had just woken up. There were even formal rituals around going to bed and waking up, which means that the act of lying down completely and disappearing into sleep was not always practical. Instead, kings often remained propped up, at least for a while, leaning against cushions, supported by pillows, maintaining a posture that was both restful and presentable, because if someone walked in, you didn't want to look like you had just collapsed into a pile of blankets. You wanted to look composed, even if you were very much not. Now imagine being a king trying to sleep, while also being aware that at any moment someone might enter the room. Not exactly the most relaxing scenario, so again, sleeping slightly upright makes sense. It keeps you in a state where you can wake easily, respond quickly, and maintain a certain level of dignity, even in the middle of the night, because of course, dignity does not sleep. Now, let's gently move away from the royal bed and drift down into the lives of servants, because while kings had elaborate sleeping spaces, servants had something else entirely. They often slept in the same rooms they worked in, on benches, on the floor, near the fireplace, if there was space, sometimes at the foot of their master's bed, which is a very close working relationship. And their sleep was not always uninterrupted. They could be called upon at any time to tend the fire, to fetch something, to respond to a need. So once again, deep, fully relaxed, lying flat sleep was not ideal. You needed to be ready, available, capable of waking quickly, without that heavy, disoriented feeling, and sitting up or resting in a semi-upright position made that easier. It allowed for lighter sleep, more awareness, less distance between rest and action. Now, let's pause here for
a moment, because there's something quietly interesting about this across very different levels of society.
From kings to servants, we see a similar pattern, not exactly the same conditions, not the same comfort levels, but the same general approach. Sleep, but stay ready. Rest, but don't disappear completely. Remain just a little bit present. Now, let's drift into another space, a medieval household, not royal, not extremely poor, somewhere in between. A family living together, sharing space, sharing routines. At night, the room grows dim, the fire burns low. People settle into their places, parents, children, maybe a relative or two, all within the same general area. And here, sleep becomes a shared experience, not silent, not isolated, but communal. You hear others, breathing, shifting, occasionally, murmuring in their sleep. And in this environment, being slightly upright has its advantages. It allows you to be aware of what's happening around you, to respond if a child wakes up or if something seems off, to exist within the group rather than completely withdrawing from it, because in a shared space, total disconnection can feel uncomfortable. Now, let's gently touch on something a bit more subtle: control. Because in a world that was often unpredictable, sleep was one of the few things you could shape, even slightly. You couldn't control the weather, or disease, or the broader structure
of society, but you could adjust how you rested, how you positioned your body, how you responded to the night, and sitting up even just a little
gave a sense of control. You weren't completely vulnerable. You weren't fully surrendered to sleep. You were managing it, guiding it, keeping one small part of yourself aware. Now, let's add a quiet contrast, because while many people adapted to this upright style of rest, there were always exceptions. People who lay down fully, who stretched out, despite the uneven bedding, despite the beliefs, despite the environment. Maybe they were too tired to care. Maybe they simply preferred it. Or maybe they just thought,
this is fine. And in those moments, we see something very familiar, because even today,
people approach sleep differently. Some need perfect conditions, others fall asleep anywhere. Some prefer structure, others drift in and out. And medieval people, despite everything, were not so different. They adapted, they experimented, they found what worked within the limits of their world. Now, picture it again. The room is quiet. The fire is low. Around you, others are resting, each in their own way. You're slightly upright, supported, balanced, not fully asleep yet, just easing into it. Your breathing slows, your thoughts soften, and for a moment, everything is still. You're still there, gently propped up, somewhere between sleep and awareness. The room is quiet. The air is cool, and outside, the night stretches on, dark and patient. Now, we're going to drift into something a little more subtle, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet layer of belief that sat underneath everyday life. Because for many medieval people, the night was not just dark, it was uncertain. Let's begin with a simple idea. When you sleep, you are vulnerable, even today. That's true. You close your eyes, you lose awareness, you trust that the world around you will remain relatively stable. But in the medieval world, that trust was a bit thinner because the night was full of things that couldn't always be explained. Strange sounds, shifting shadows, moments where something felt just slightly off. And without modern explanations, people filled those gaps with beliefs. Some thought that spirits moved more freely at night, not necessarily in a dramatic, terrifying way, just present, lingering, passing through the same spaces where people slept. Others believed in creatures that could sit on your chest, press down on you and make it hard to breathe, a sensation we might now associate with sleep paralysis. But at the time, it was something else entirely. Something external, something visiting, and if you've ever experienced that feeling,
even briefly, you know it's not exactly comfortable. So imagine lying completely flat in a dark room, already a little uncertain about what might happen while you sleep. Not ideal, but if you're sitting up,
even slightly, if your chest is more open, you're breathing a bit easier, your body less fully surrendered, it feels safer, more controlled, less like you've given yourself over completely to the night. Now, let's gently touch on another belief. The idea that your soul, or spirit, could wander while you slept. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just quietly drifting. And if your body was too still, too flat, too close to the posture of death, there was a subtle worry that something might go wrong, that you might not return in quite the same way again. Not a constant fear, more like a background thought, a quiet just in case. So by staying slightly upright, slightly engaged with the physical world, you maintained a connection, a presence. You were still here. Now, let's pause for
a moment, take a slow breath, because this isn't about fear in the way we usually think of it. It's not panic. It's not constant anxiety. It's more like
a gentle awareness that the world is not entirely predictable and that awareness shapes behavior. Small adjustments, subtle choices, like how you position your body when you sleep. Now, let's drift into something a bit more practical again, because
not all nighttime concerns were supernatural. Some were very real. Fire, for example. Open flames were common. Candles, oil lamps, fireplaces, and while they provided warmth and light, they also carried risk. A spark, a fallen candle, a bit of fabric too close to the flame. And suddenly, the night becomes
less peaceful. So people often slept in a way that allowed them to wake quickly, to respond, to notice changes. And again, being slightly upright helped. It reduced that heavy, deep sleep feeling. It made transitions quicker, sleep to wake, stillness to movement. Now let's gently add another layer. Animals, because in many medieval homes, especially in rural areas, animals were not always kept at a distance. Chickens, dogs, sometimes even larger animals, sharing space or staying very close by. And animals, as we know, do not always respect personal boundaries. They move, they make noise, they occasionally decide that your sleeping area is also their sleeping area. So once again, being slightly upright, slightly aware, made it easier to respond, to shift, to adjust, to gently reclaim your space without too much disruption. Now, let's take a quiet step back and look at the bigger picture, because all of these elements, the beliefs, the environment, the practical concerns, they don't operate separately. They blend, they overlap, they create a kind of atmosphere around sleep. An understanding that rest is important, but also not entirely without risk, so people adapt, not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly over time. They sit up a little more, they use an extra pillow, they stay slightly elevated, and eventually it becomes normal. Now, let's return to that room. The fire is low, the shadows are soft, you're resting, not fully lying down, not fully sitting up, just balanced. Your breathing is steady, your body is still. But there's a small part of you that remains aware, listening, present, not
tense, just ready if needed. And in that quiet state,
sleep comes gently in waves. Never too deep, all at once, but enough. Always enough. You're still there, resting quietly, somewhere between upright and at ease. But now, something begins to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly, over time, because as the medieval world began to change, so did the way people slept, and little by little, the habit of sitting up at night started to fade. Let's begin with something simple. Beds got better, not overnight, not all at once, but gradually materials improved. Craftsmanship became more refined. Mattresses, while still far from perfect, became a bit more consistent, less lumpy, less unpredictable, more supportive. And when the surface beneath you becomes more comfortable, lying down starts to feel like a reasonable option, not a challenge, not a negotiation with gravity, just rest. At the same time, homes began to change, rooms became more defined, spaces became more private. People were no longer always sleeping in shared areas with multiple others moving around them, which meant fewer interruptions, less need to stay partially alert, more opportunity to fully relax, to stretch out, to let your body settle into a deeper kind of stillness. Now, let's gently bring in another factor, lighting, because for most of the medieval period, night was truly night, dark, quiet, and long. But as time moved forward, lighting improved. Candles became more common, oil lamps more reliable. Eventually, much later, entirely new forms of light would change everything. But even small improvements meant that people could stay awake a bit longer. They didn't have to go to sleep immediately after sunset. And that began to shift the rhythm. Remember that pattern. We talked about first sleep, wake, second sleep. Well, as evenings stretched slightly longer, that pattern started to compress. People stayed awake later, which meant they woke up later. And over time, the gap in the middle of the night began to shrink until eventually, for many people, it disappeared. One longer stretch of sleep replaced two shorter ones, and with that change came a new kind of rest. Deeper, more continuous, less interrupted. Now here's the interesting part. When sleep becomes one long stretch, your position matters more because you're not waking up halfway through to adjust. You're staying in that position for hours. So naturally, people begin to experiment. They try lying flat. They try different arrangements of pillows. They notice what feels better. And slowly, the idea that lying down is dangerous or unhealthy starts to lose its hold. Not completely at first. Old beliefs tend to linger, but gradually, experience begins to outweigh tradition. Now, let's
add a quiet cultural shift, because as medical knowledge
slowly, very slowly, began to evolve. Some of the older ideas about humors and body balance started to be questioned, not immediately replaced, just gently challenged. People began to observe that lying down didn't necessarily lead to all the problems they once feared, that breathing could still be fine, that rest could still be effective, and that perhaps comfort had its own value, which is a surprisingly modern idea. Now, let's drift into a slightly more refined setting, an early modern bedroom. The bed is still wooden, but better made. The mattress, still stuffed, but more evenly filled. There are more pillows now, more attention to arrangement, and slowly the posture shifts. People begin to lie back more fully, still propped up at times, especially for reading or resting during the day, but at night they stretch out, they
Settle, they allow themselves to sink into the bed. Of course,
not everyone adopts this change at the same pace. Wealthy households tend to shift first, better resources, more access to improved materials, more space. While in rural areas and among the working class, older habits linger longer, because when your environment hasn't changed much, your routines don't either. But eventually, the shift spreads. Slowly, quietly. Now, let's pause for a moment and notice something. This change from sitting up to lying down was not just about comfort. It was about trust. Trust in the environment, trust in the body, trust that it was safe to let go completely, to sleep deeply, to become still in a way that once felt a little too close to something else. And with that trust came a new relationship with sleep, less guarded, less segmented, more continuous, more immersive. Now, let's return to you in that quiet space. But this time, something is different. The bed beneath you is softer. The room is more private. The night, still dark, but less uncertain, and slowly you shift from upright to slightly reclined, from slightly reclined to fully lying down. Your body stretches, your head rests, your breathing deepens, and for the first time in a long while, there is no need to stay half aware, no need to remain ready. You can simply sleep, and that is where we begin to recognize something familiar, because this position, this feeling, this is ours. The way we rest now, flat, still, comfortable, something that feels completely normal, and yet, for centuries, it
wasn't. So the next time you lie down and settle into your bed, take a quiet moment, because what feels natural to you
was once a small rebellion against habit, a slow shift away from caution and toward comfort. And somewhere in the long, quiet history of sleep, there are still echoes of that older world, of upright nights, of midnight waking, of rooms filled with soft breathing and gentle awareness, a different rhythm, a different way of resting, not better, not worse, just different. At this point, everything feels a little softer. The room, calmer. The bed, more forgiving. The night, less uncertain, and slowly, almost without anyone noticing, sleep has changed, not just in posture, but in feeling. Because for much of the medieval world, sleep was something you managed, you adjusted to it, worked around it, stayed slightly aware within it. But now, as we drift forward, sleep becomes something else. Something closer to what we know today. Something easier. Let's begin with the bed again, because it quietly tells the whole story. By the time we move out of the medieval period, beds are no longer just functional, they become intentional, designed. People start to care about how they feel, not just whether they exist. Mattresses become thicker, stuffing becomes more evenly distributed, frames become sturdier, and most importantly, pillows multiply. Not just one or two, but several, stacked, arranged, adjusted, until the position feels right. And here's where things shift in an interesting way. Instead of forcing the body into a slightly upright posture for safety or belief, People begin to use pillows to create comfort. If you want to be elevated, you can. If you want to lie flat, you can. The choice becomes yours. Now, let's gently move into the mind, because as physical comfort improves, something else follows. Mental ease when you're not worried about the cold or the surface beneath you or who might be moving around nearby. Your body relaxes more deeply, and when your body relaxes, your mind follows. You don't have to stay partially alert. You don't have to listen for every small sound. You can simply drift, and that kind of rest is different. It's quieter, heavier, in a good way, more complete. Now, think about how you fall asleep. You lie down, you shift a little, adjust your pillow, maybe pull the blanket closer, and then, slowly, your awareness fades. You're not planning to wake up in the middle of the night. You're not preparing to sit up or check your surroundings. You're just letting go. And that act, letting go completely, is something that took centuries to become normal. Now, let's bring back a small contrast, because even as sleep became more comfortable, more continuous, some older habits didn't disappear entirely. People still propped themselves up to read, to think, to rest during the day. The semi-upright position
Didn't vanish, it just
changed its role from necessity to preference, from protection to comfort. And in a way, that's kind of nice, because it means that those old habits, those quiet adaptations, didn't go to waste. They simply evolved. Now, let's drift into one more scene, a quiet bedroom, somewhere in the early modern world. The bed is large, layered with blankets, soft by the standards of the time. A person settles in, they lie down, fully. No hesitation, no second thought, just rest. And as they close their eyes, there's no sense of needing to stay alert, no background worry about posture or symbolism or unseen movement, just stillness. And that stillness is something we've inherited. It feels natural to us, obvious, like it was always meant to be this way. But now, it wasn't for a very long time. Sleep looked different. It felt different. It required a different kind of awareness, different kind of balance between rest and readiness. Now, let's gently bring everything together, because this story, while simple on the surface, is really about adaptation, about how people respond to their environment, their beliefs, their limitations, and how those responses slowly change over time until something that once felt necessary becomes unnecessary, and something that once felt strange becomes normal. So the idea that medieval people slept sitting up, it's not just a curious detail, it's a reflection of their world, a world where comfort was limited, where the night was uncertain, where
the body and the environment were in constant negotiation. And now, here you are, lying down, comfortable, supported, in a position that feels completely natural, and yet quietly connected to all those people who once rested differently, who sat
up, leaned back, stayed aware, and found their own version of rest in a very different world. So as you settle in, wherever you are, take a slow breath and let your body relax. Let your thoughts drift, because tonight you don't need to stay upright. You don't need to listen for every sound. You don't need to prepare for anything at all. Everything is quiet now. The room still. Your body settled. Your breathing slow and even, and yet, even here, in this modern kind of rest, there are small, almost invisible echoes of the past, because despite everything that has changed, we haven't completely left those old habits behind. Not entirely. They've just softened, blended into the way we live now, without us really noticing. Let's start with something simple. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night? 4.
No clear reason, no loud noise, no obvious disturbance, just awake. You check the time, maybe shift a little, maybe lie there for a while, and then, eventually,
You fall back asleep. That moment, that quiet in-between space, it's not new. It's something people have been experiencing for centuries. The difference is, we now treat it as an interruption, a small inconvenience, something to fix. But once, it was just part of the rhythm, expected, even useful. Now, think about how you position yourself when you're not quite ready to sleep. Maybe you sit up against a pillow, maybe you scroll or read or just think for a while. You're not fully lying down yet, you're easing into it, and in that posture, slightly upright, slightly supported, there's something familiar, something that quietly echoes those older habits, even when we're sick or uncomfortable. We instinctively adjust, we raise our head, stack pillows, sit up a little to breathe more easily, and without realizing it, we're doing exactly what medieval people did, just with better pillows. Now, let's drift into another small detail. Security. Even today, many people don't sleep completely flat, in a completely open position. They curl slightly. Face a certain direction. Keep a light on in the hallway. Small things that create a sense of safety, because deep down, that instinct hasn't disappeared. The world is safer now, in many ways. More predictable, but the body still remembers, still prefers a little awareness, a little control. Now, let's gently
step back and look at the whole picture, because this story about sleeping sitting up,
it's not really just about posture, it's about how humans adapt, how we shape our habits around the world we live in, and how those habits slowly change as the world changes. Medieval people didn't sit up because they wanted to be uncomfortable. They did it because it made sense, given their beliefs, their environment, their daily lives. It was a solution, a quiet, practical way to rest in a world that wasn't always restful, and over time,
as that world softened, even slightly, as beds improved, as homes became safer, as nights became less uncertain, the need for that solution faded and something new took its place. But not completely, because traces of the old way still
remain in the way we wake, the way we adjust, the way we ease into sleep, instead of dropping into it all at once. Now, picture it one last time, a long time ago, a quiet room, a low fire, soft shadows on rough walls. Someone sits slightly upright, wrapped in layers, resting as best they can. Not perfectly comfortable, not fully relaxed, but at peace with it, because this is how the world works for them. And now, a different room, a different time. You lying down, fully supported, in a way that feels completely natural. The night is still, the air is calm, and sleep comes easily. Two different worlds, two different ways of resting, and yet quietly connected by the same need, the same rhythm, the same gentle drift into stillness. So as you settle in, wherever you are, there's nothing left to adjust, nothing left to figure out, no posture to maintain, no awareness to hold on to. Just rest. Let your body sink a little deeper. Let your breathing slow just a bit more. Let the quiet stretch out around you. Because tonight, you don't need to sit up. You don't need to stay ready. You don't need to do anything at all. By now, everything has softened. The story, the room, even the sense of time, it's all moving a little slower, and that's exactly where we want to be. Because sleep real sleep, has always lived in this space, not in sharp moments, not in sudden changes, but in gentle transitions, in the quiet. Slide from awareness into rest now. Think back, just for a moment, to everything we've drifted through tonight. The upright sleepers, the uneven beds, the shared rooms, filled with soft breathing and shifting shadows, the slow rhythm of first sleep and second sleep, the quiet waking in the middle of the night, when the world felt still and slightly suspended. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always comfortable, but it worked in its own way. It worked. And then, slowly, things changed. Beds softened, rooms quieted. The night became less uncertain, and people began to lie down, fully, without hesitation, without that subtle need to stay half aware. But here's the quiet truth. Sleep has never been exactly the same for everyone. Not then, not now. Some nights are easy, some are not. Some nights you drift off without thinking, and others, you linger, you shift, you adjust, you sit up for a moment without even realizing why. And in those moments, you're not doing anything wrong, you're just touching something older, something that goes back much further than we usually think. Because the body remembers things even when the mind doesn't. It remembers how to adapt, how to stay just a little aware when needed, how to rest even in imperfect conditions. So if you ever find yourself awake in the quiet middle of the night, not fully asleep, not fully alert, just there. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to force yourself back into anything. You can just exist in that space for a while, like people once did, calmly, without urgency, letting the moment pass at its own pace. Now, imagine that again. The night around you, still and quiet. No pressure to sleep immediately. No need to check the time, just breathing. Slow, even, steady. And maybe, after a while, you shift slightly. You settle a little deeper. You let your body relax just a bit more. And without really noticing when it happens, you drift, because sleep doesn't need to be chased. It doesn't need to be controlled. It comes when you let it. Now, everything is very quiet. The story almost finished. The room completely still. Your body heavy in that comfortable way. There's nothing left to think about. Nothing left to adjust. No reason to stay awake, just the soft, steady
rhythm of breathing, the gentle weight of rest, the quiet feeling of letting go, and somewhere far away in time. A figure sits, slightly upright,
in a dimly lit room, eyes half closed, balanced between sleep and awareness, and here, now. You are lying down, completely at ease, completely safe. Two different ways of resting, separated by centuries, but connected by the same simple need to close your eyes, to let the world fade, to drift gently into sleep. So now there's nothing more to do, nothing more to hear, nothing more to follow. All right, just a little more. Everything is already so still. The story has slowed, almost to a stop. The room feels softer now, quieter than before, and your body has likely settled into that gentle, heavy calm. At this point, there isn't really anything new to explain. No new details to add. Just a few final thoughts. Drifting, like the last moments before sleep fully takes over, because when we think about it, sleep has always been a kind of balance, not perfect, not exact, just something we move through, night after night. For medieval people, that balance looked different. They rested, but stayed ready. They slept, but woke in between. They leaned, instead of fully letting go, and somehow, in that world, it was enough. Not ideal, not comfortable in the way we understand comfort, but enough to get through the night. And now, here we are, with softer beds, quieter rooms, long, uninterrupted stretches of sleep, when everything goes right. But even now, it's not always perfect. Sometimes you wake up, sometimes you shift, or sit up, or stare into the quiet for a while. And that's okay. That's just part of it. Because sleep has never been one single thing. It's always been a little fluid, a little flexible, something that changes with time, with place, with the shape of your day. So tonight, or whenever you're listening to this, there's nothing you need to do perfectly. No ideal position, no exact method. You're lying down. That's fine. If you're slightly propped up, that's fine too. If you drift in and out for a while, that's been happening for centuries. You're not doing it wrong. You're just resting in your own way. Now, let's slow things down even more. Take a quiet breath in and let it out gently. Feel the weight of your body supported, those stillness of the room around you, the absence of anything urgent. There are no responsibilities here, no expectations, just this moment. And in this moment, sleep is already close. You don't have to reach for it. You don't have to think about it. It's just there, waiting quietly. So if your thoughts are still moving a little, let them. They'll slow down on their own. If your body shifts just slightly, that's okay too. It's just finding its way. Everything is already settling, and somewhere far in the background of history, there are still those quiet nights, those upright sleepers, those dim rooms where people
rested as best they could. And all of that led here to this moment where you can lie down fully and simply. Rest, no effort, no awareness to hold on to, no need to stay ready, just breathing. Slow, even, soft, and now we let everything fade. Just a little more. The story, the thoughts, the edges of awareness, until there's nothing left but quiet. Everything is soft now, your body heavy. The room calm, the story almost gone, leaving only quiet space. At this point, there's nothing left to explain, no new details to follow, no more points to make, just the gentle rhythm of being and the soft pull of sleep. Think back for a moment to all those upright sleepers. Centuries ago, people adjusting to uneven beds, piles of straw, low fires,
shifting shadows. They rested as best they could, balancing awareness with the need to sleep. It might seem strange to us now, but that small, cautious adaptation, it was their way of negotiating the night, and in a quiet way, it still whispers to us today, because sleep, even now, is never purely passive. Even with modern beds, warm blankets, and quiet rooms, there's a small part of the body, a small part of the mind, that remains subtly aware, ready to adjust, just in case. But tonight, you don't need to adjust, you don't need to be ready, you don't need to sit up or shift or listen. You can simply let go. Feel your body fully supported now. Notice the weight sinking into the bed, the quiet of the room pressing gently against you, the air steady and calm, moving softly around you, and as you lie there, completely still, let your mind soften. Let your thoughts drift, without forming, without needing to resolve. The night is patient. It carries no urgency. It asks nothing. It only holds you in its gentle dark. Take another quiet, slow breath, in and out, longer than the last, even more relaxed. Everything above you, around you, inside you, is slowing. Edges dissolve, awareness drifts away, the small residual tensions of the day release. Your body becomes one with the bed somewhere, centuries ago. Someone else did the same, upright, leaning, adjusting to the lumpy mattress, the flickering fire, and in that quiet adaptation, found their own rest. And now, tonight, you follow that lineage, a long, slow tradition of sleep, shaped by practicality, comfort, and eventually, letting go. The story is nearly complete. The words are now just whispers. The voice itself grows softer, slower, fading, matching the rhythm of your breath. Feel your shoulders loosen, your back release, your legs heavy, your head resting perfectly. All thought, all tension, all gentle vigilance slips away. There is only stillness, only calm, only quiet, and now, just as it should be, sleep takes over completely. No need to fight it. No need to guide it. No need to watch or adjust. It is here. It has always been waiting, and now it carries you. The night holds you. The bed supports you. The air surrounds you. And for the first, or the 1,000th time tonight, you are entirely at rest. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to think, nothing more to observe. Only sleep, only quiet, only the gentle, endless drift that has carried humans from upright, straw-filled nights to this soft, calm, modern resting place. And as you sink deeper into the embrace of rest, the story, the voice, the centuries of quiet adaptation all fade, leaving only
You and the night, and now nothing more is needed. Sleep fully. Good night.